Okay, folks, I wanted to share a couple of pieces here with you that, again, are very relevant to end-time Bible prophecy. And, you know, I've talked about it on multiple occasions of what's going on over there in the areas over in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe along the borders of Western Russia, but specifically also in the Baltic area. Mostly it involves Russia and the U.S. and NATO forces, but now we're seeing China going over there and going to conduct naval drills in the Baltic Sea with Russia. And again, folks, you know, this is relevant to many different prophecies. You off the top of my head, you think of the kings of the East of Daniel 11, that Russia and China are both nations that are involved in that. The 200 million man army to cross the dried up Euphrates River, prophesied in Revelation 9 and 16, and so on. And I'm going to be talking a lot more about that in videos to come. But this was something that came across the wire earlier today. It's talking about how a fleet of Chinese military vessels have embarked on a journey toward the Baltic Sea to participate in drills with Russia. And if you remember, just a couple days ago, I did a video talking about how China was over in the Strait of Hormuz to hold joint naval drills with Iran, who Iran is also part of the Kings of the East, will also be part of the 200 million man army that will cross the dried up Euphrates River, as I said. And so you're going to continuously see Russia, China, Iran, potentially Turkey, and of course other nations, and I'll be talking a lot more about which nations in videos to come. But let's focus on Russia, China, Iran right now. And I mean, look at what just happened over in Syria with the escalations there. Bible prophecy is being fulfilled all over the place, right before our very eyes, folks. And I know a lot of the subscribers maybe aren't Bible-believing, true born-again Christians. Many of you are, and God bless all of you. But people don't like when you talk about the Bible, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, folks, it's undeniable. Okay, everybody wants to talk about the Bible, but most of them haven't even read it or studied it. And I'm not some rookie who's come out here and just popping off at the mouth like half of these false prophets on YouTube reporting on any event trying to make it Bible prophecy. No, that's why I only report on the relevant stuff and not every little thing that happens. And I don't fill people's minds with all the nonsense behind the scenes that just is a distraction. What people need to understand is the true gospel that can save the soul and lead to eternal life in heaven. And they need to see the signs of the times unfolding. Jesus said, when you see these things come to pass, look up, for your redemption draweth nigh. He said, when you see these things, you'll know that it is near, that I am at the door. And so that's what we see here in this headline. China naval fleet steams toward the Baltic Sea to participate in drills with Russia. And now the American Free Press quoting Chinese state media as saying earlier today that 3 ships headed by the Changsha destroyer steamed toward Russia's coasts at the Baltic Sea to link up with Russian vessels for drills near St. Petersburg and Kaliningrad that will take place officially in late July. But they're already headed there now. And the fleet would include Chinese Marines and shipborne helicopters, according to Xinhua News Agency out of China. And the Chinese and Russians have been holding military exercises dubbed Joint Sea since, I believe it started back in 2012. And the two countries have taken turns in hosting the drills, which many say are meant to counter the United States expanding naval activities there in the waters surrounding them. And if you remember, folks, I believe it was back in September that Russia and China held massive joint naval drills over in the South China Sea as well. And interestingly enough, that's been a focal point with U.S. forces that have been heavily militarizing the region. And, of course, that's not even mentioning what's going on just north of the South China Sea up in North Korea. But that's a whole nother story. But it's all signs of the times, folks. Wars and rumors of wars that is prophesied by Jesus in the Gospels. to be signs of the times that would precede his second coming, his return to the earth. And we're starting to see these signs at unprecedented levels, folks. And the exact nations prophesied doing the exact things that they're prophesied to do. We're seeing things that were prophesied thousands of years ago come to pass. Relations between nations that people couldn't foresee before are now starting to come to pass. And it's going to continue. And the piece here, it goes on to say that the war games will take place at a sensitive political time, as U.S. President Donald Trump is scheduled to visit NATO ally Poland over there in the Baltic region there, a country on the Baltic Sea. And he'll be there on July 5th and 6th, ahead of his participation in the G20 summit there in Germany. And Russia has been irked by NATO's growing inclination to expand eastward, and their heavy militarization and military buildup there of U.S. NATO forces on the Russian border there in Eastern Europe. And it says that while the Western military alliance has also increased its buildup along Russia's western borders after a conflict erupted in Ukraine 3 years ago. And Trump's way of handling NATO and his criticism of European partners about their financial contribution to the alliance have raised questions about the extent of U.S. President's commitment to future NATO missions. And many expect Trump to revise his position during the visit to Poland next month. But folks, I'm going to tell you right now, eventually either NATO will cease to exist or it will be entirely European countries, and that's something you can bank on, because the Bible prophesies that a European superpower will arise and emerge, and a lot more can be said on that, but I don't want to rabbit tail too much here and get off topic. But all these things tie in together, folks. Okay, and when you're studying the Word of God and end time prophecies or end time eschatology, biblical eschatology studies, you need to be able to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And when you do that, and you take the time and you start to look at world events, it starts to become so clear that it is playing out right before our very eyes. And so the piece goes on to mention that Xinhua said this year's edition of the joint drills with Russia would improve coordination between the two navies on joint defense operations at sea. It added the main objective was to consolidate and advance the Sino-Russian comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination and deepen friendly and practical cooperation between the two militaries. And Russia joined Chinese ships in previous year's drills in the South China Sea, as I mentioned before, a disputed vital trade route where other countries of the region challenge China's construction of artificial islands, and there are many overlapping territorial disputes from regional nations there. And of course the U.S. obviously has their nose poked in that situation, as I mentioned, as many are well aware of. As a matter of fact, if you remember, Steve Bannon came out a few months back, and I did a video on this, and he said we're going to war in the South China Sea. And at that time, he was the head strategist of the White House, and I forget the official title, but I'll link up the video that I did on that in the description box below for anyone who wants to check it out. But interestingly enough, folks, this piece here comes on the heels of this next piece I want to show you, in which NATO war games defending the Baltic weak spot for the first time ever were taking place. Okay? And as a matter of fact, here's a piece here, and I'll link you up to it. It's from Reuters, and it's talking about, as you see here, NATO war game defends the Baltic weak spot for first time. And it goes on to talk about in the report how U.S. and British troops have carried out the first large-scale NATO defensive drill on the border between Poland and Lithuania, rehearsing for a possible scenario in which Russia might try to sever the Baltic states from the rest of the Western Alliance. And interestingly enough, this is the exact regions in that same area there where Russia and China will be holding massive naval drills. And of course, I did previous videos on the other drills that will be taking place by the Russians that could involve up to 100,000 Russian troops. And so things are certainly heating up, folks. And it goes on to talk about, in this piece here, that the frontier where this has taken place runs for 104 kilometers or 65 miles through farmland, woods, and low hills in an area known as the Suwalki Gap. And if seized by Russia, it would cut off Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, who are obviously NATO allies, or NATO members, member states. And over 2 days, it says, U.S. helicopters and British aircraft took part in exercises that also involved troops from Poland, Lithuania, and Croatia in a simulated defense of the potential flashpoint. And they're saying this region could be a major flashpoint for war. And in a quote from U.S. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, and what he told reporters from Reuters, he said the gap is vulnerable because of the geography. It's not inevitable that there's going to be an attack, of course, but if that was closed, then you have 3 allies that are north that are potentially isolated from the rest of the alliance. And Russia denies any plans to invade the Baltics and says it is NATO that is threatening stability in Eastern Europe by building up its military presence there and staging massive war games and military drills. But Hodges, who commands U.S. forces in Europe, said it was crucial for the alliance to show that it was ready. And he said, we have to practice. We have to demonstrate that we can support allies and keeping the gap there open in maintaining that connection. And so it goes on to say here how the potential game changer was back in Russia's 2014 annexation of Ukraine's Crimea Peninsula in the Black Sea. And that has changed NATO's calculations, seeing Russia increasingly as an adversary more and more ever since. Now, it happened before then as well, but it took on another level after that. And before then, no forces from other alliance members were stationed in the Baltic states. Now, 4 battle groups, totaling just over 4,500 troops, have been deployed to Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. If you remember, I did a video on that talking about how the U.S. and NATO forces had established 4 battalions in that region. And the Poles have been pushing other NATO allies to use some of these troops to secure the vulnerable Suwalki corridor and deter potential Russian aggression. But while 1,500 troops took part in this weekend's exercises, a Lithuanian commander cautioned that it would take much more to defend the gap in the event of a genuine conflict. This is only a small-scale drill compared to what would be needed in case of a real attack, but it is important for us because it shows that allies share our worries, said Brigadier General Valdemaras Ruspis, who's head of the Lithuanian land forces. And simulating a covert insertion of forces, 3 American helicopters landed in a field in rural Lithuania on Saturday, startling grazing horses and cows in an area several hours of drive from where a U.S. battalion is stationed at Orzysz base there in Poland. And in a quote from Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Venter, who leads the U.S. battle group there in Orzysz, he said, "The training helps present a credible defense force that hopefully will deter aggression. But if not, we'll be prepared to move to defend the borders of NATO." And this Lieutenant Stephen Venter, who, again, he leads the U.S. battle group over there in Poland, and NATO officials believe Moscow will hold its own exercise in Russia and Belarus on a much greater scale in September, possibly, as I mentioned, involving 100,000 troops. And this is under the codename Zapad and Zapad West, as I mentioned in a previous video on that. And Baltic officials believe Moscow will also rehearse an attack on the Suwalki Gap during the Zapad exercises. And in a quote here from the Major General John Gronsky, Deputy Commander of the U.S. Army of Europe, observing the exercise, in Lithuania. He said, I think it's important for the soldiers to train on land that they may have to defend someday. And so they're saying this is a very real threat. We're seeing the massive war games and drills. We're seeing a militarization that is reminiscent of Cold War era levels. And things just continue to heat up, folks. There you have it. I mean, massive war games going on over there in the Baltic. And now China and Russia will be holding massive naval drills over there, larger than before, in the midst of all this. So signs of the times continue to unfold here, folks. And I'll put the links to these reports in the description box below. But until next time, this is Brother Joey signing off. Much love in these times, my friends, and God bless you guys. Now, we're seeing China going over there and going to conduct naval drills in the Baltic Sea with Russia. And again, folks, you know, this is relevant to many different prophecies. You off the top of my head, you think of the Kings of the East of Daniel 11, that Russia and China are both nations that are involved in that. The 200 million man army to cross the dried up Euphrates River. At what just happened over in Syria with the escalations there. Bible prophecy is being fulfilled all over the place, right before our very eyes, folks. And I know a lot of the subscribers maybe aren't Bible-believing, true born-again Christians. Many of you are. And God bless all of you. But people don't like when you talk about the Bible, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, folks, it's undeniable. Okay, everybody wants to talk about the Bible. Okay, folks, I wanted to share a couple of pieces here with you that, again, are very relevant to end-time Bible prophecy. And, you know, I've talked about it on multiple occasions, what's going on over there in the areas over in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe along the borders of Western Russia, but specifically also in the Baltic area. Mostly it involves Russia and the U.S. and NATO forces, but now prophesied in Revelation 9 and 16, and so on. And I'm going to be talking a lot more about that in videos to come. But this was something that came across the wire earlier today. It's talking about how a fleet of Chinese military vessels have embarked on a journey toward the Baltic Sea to participate in drills with Russia. And if you remember, just a couple days ago, I did a video talking about how China was over in the Strait of Hormuz to hold joint naval drills with Iran, who Iran is also part of the Kings of the East, will also be part of the 200 million man army that will cross the dried up Euphrates River, as I said. And so you're going to continuously see Russia, China, Iran, potentially Turkey, and of course other nations, and I'll be talking a lot more about which nations in videos to come. But let's focus on Russia, China, Iran right now, and I mean, look